Madam Mayor, we are live on YouTube and recording. You can begin the meeting whenever you like.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. We will get started. Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, just a reminder that the meeting is going to be recorded and live streamed on the Township's YouTube channel. And we do have participants who are going to be joining us at various points in the meeting via Zoom, as well as from the council chambers. We'll go through and call the roll. Deputy Mayor Mills.
Present.
Councillor Watt.
Present.
Councillor Johnston.
Present.
Of course, myself, Heather Watson. Councillor Report is en route and will be joining us shortly. On the staff side, we have our clerk, Martina Chait-Cartway. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Our interim CIO, Matt Feather.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. I believe we have our interim treasurer on the line, Paul Kramer, who will come off of. Hello. And is Anita joining us today or no? She's unavailable. Okay. So we do have former council in attendance. I will call the meeting to order, beginning with the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the lands which are part of the 1818 Treaty 20 in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe bands of the Great Ojibwe Nation. We offer our gratitude to the Ojibwe for their care and knowledge of the lands on which we work, live, and enjoy. May we honor and respect their teaching and our treaty obligations as we grow together. And with that, we'll just pause for a moment of silence, please. Okay, moving on, of course, council had the agenda package distributed in advance. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Councilor Johnston?
Yes, I do. On receiving the minutes of there's a few grouped together, but one was July 23rd. So we received everything but that maybe.
Item 6.1, July 23rd minutes?
Yes.
All right, we will hold that. And we do have a pecuniary interest submitted for councilor report as well on an item 7.3. And I don't know the file numbers, Madam Clerk, offhand.
I will confirm that and let you know as we get closer.
Okay, great, thank you. And so what we'll do at that time is separate those out, I'm assuming as well. Okay, perfect. Okay, and then we have an agenda change. Moving on to item 5, the adoption of the agenda. Item 8.2, we had a presentation scheduled from Kim Blackwell with Volunteer Peterborough. That presentation is not happening, so we'll be pulling that off the agenda today and probably reschedule that at a later date. So with that, a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Deputy Mayor Nelson, seconded by Councillor Johnston, all in favor. That motion carries. Thank you very much. So on to item 6.1. So let's pull out the July 23rd separate, and we'll take care of the adoption of the rest of them at this point in time. A motion on that, please. Councillor Johnston, seconded by Councillor Watt, all in favor. That motion carries. And then Councillor Johnson, are you wanting to step out while we do the adoption on July 23rd?
Yeah.
And a motion for those minutes, please.
Make a motion to receive.
Motion to receive and adopt, yes, Councillor Watt, thank you. Deputy Mayor Nelson,
Certainly.
thank you, all in favor. And that motion carries. We can get Councillor Johnston back in the room. Thank you, Mr. Ritter. Then we'll be looking for the June 18th regular council meetings to receive and approve those. Councillor Watt, and that's seconded by Deputy Mayor Nelson. All in favor? And that motion also carries. Thank you very much. On to consent agenda. I suppose the council report's not here, we could just move forward. So looking down the consent agenda, are there any items besides those that council report is holding? Doesn't matter. Are there any items that people want to speak to on the consent agenda? And if not, we're just gonna be looking for a motion then to receive and approve. Councilor
Make a
Johnson,
motion to approve.
thank you. Councilor Watt, seconded. Any discussion?
I had one question, and, maybe your clerk or,
What's the item?
it's on the, aggregate resource side.
Okay.
And I was just kind of unclear of exactly what that change was. Can you shed a little light on what the change is compared to what it was?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The change that's taking place is the act will now include a list of small and routine site plan changes that can be completed without going through a full application process. I can get a copy of that list and circulate it to you if you want to see the changes.
You cleared it up as clear as mud. I thought that's what it actually was meaning, but I wasn't sure. So thanks for that clarification. I think I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Thanks.
Excellent. So we do have a motion then on the floor to receive and approve the consent agenda. Moved and duly seconded. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, on to delegations, and we have a public meeting under the under the development charge. So I was gonna say the planning act is where I was going in my head. And we do have Daryl Labs from Watson and Associates here as well. Councilor Watt. Thank you very much. Seconded by Councilor Johnston. All in favor? That motion carries, and I assume we're handing it over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor and members of council. As you dutifully pointed out last time I was here presenting, although my firm's name is Watson and Associates Economists Limited, there is no relation to the Madam Mayor. And so my name is Daryl Labs. I'm a managing partner from Watson and Associates, and I'm here today to undertake the development charges public meeting presentation that's required under the Development Charges Act. Next slide, please. And so what we'll do is we'll start off with just a bit of the purpose of the public meeting, why we need to have it. We'll talk a little bit about the study process that we undertook and the timelines. We'll provide a brief overview of development charges, what they are and why municipalities use them. We'll present the proposed charges that we've calculated and the policies that are in the background study and bylaw. We're happy to hear from the public if there's any delegations, answer any questions from council, and then we'll formally conclude the public meeting. Next slide, please. And so the purpose, stated it is a requirement of the Development Charges Act that we do hold this public meeting, and it really is to provide a summary of the development charges background study that we have to prepare. Typically, background studies are 200 pages long, provide a detailed set of calculations, and so this really just summarizes what the charges and policies are. And so prior to council's consideration of the bylaw or passage of the bylaw, which would be later this evening, we had to release that development charge background study 60 days before today, and I'm gonna touch on the timeline on the next slide. Next slide, please. And so we started the process working with staff at the beginning of the year through April and May. We worked with staff in preparing the calculations, preparing that background study, and we released the background study on June 4th. We had a council meeting on June 18th to provide an introduction of the background study, a little bit about the calculations that were presented. And then we're having this public meeting tonight, and then as well, council will be considering the bylaw later this evening. Next slide, please. And so development charges are a revenue tool used by municipalities across the province to recover the capital costs associated with new development. And so if you have residential growth or non-residential growth coming forward, you have to build infrastructure to accommodate that growth. Development charges allow you to recover the cost of that infrastructure from that development. And so these costs are in addition to what a developer would normally pay for as part of their subdivision. If you think of a typical subdivision, within that you have roads, maybe streetlights, maybe the stop sign infrastructure. That would all be paid for and installed by the developer. The development charges are for the broader infrastructure to connect these developments. Okay, we're empowered to do so by the Development Charges Act. And typically development charges are paid for at the time of building permits. There are some nuances to that, but generally they're calculated and paid for at that time. Next slide, please. So, development charges mentioned are that revenue tool to recover the costs associated with growth. If you have the growth, then you have that new development and you have to invest in infrastructure to accommodate that development, the money has to come from somewhere. And so to the extent that that infrastructure is related to that new growth, you can recover the cost from the new growth and by development charges. Otherwise, you have to use taxes or your existing reserves and reserve funds to pay for that infrastructure. Next slide, please. And so we're guided by the Development Charges Act and years of case law through the Ontario Land Tribunal, which guide how we undertake these calculations. But put very simply, what we do first is identify the amount, type, and location of development we're going to anticipate. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then from there, what we need to do is identify the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. So for example, if we need, let's say, parks services or recreation services to accommodate that growth. From there, then we need to drill down and say, well, what are those actual capital costs? What do we need to invest in to accommodate this development? So, for example, if we have new people coming to the community, maybe we need to expand the parking spaces in the parks. And so that would be the specific capital costs. Once we identify the capital costs for all these different services, then we need to make a series of deductions. So if we're going to receive any grants, subsidies, or other contributions, we would take that off. Any share of the costs that relate to or benefit the existing community, we need to make a deduction for that. There's a service level calculation we have to do that's set out for background studies. We're not allowed to exceed that. And if we do, we need to make a deduction. And then if there's any balances in the development charge reserve funds, we deduct those as well. So after all those deductions, we come up with the net costs associated with new development. Then we take that cost and we allocate it between residential and non-residential benefit, divided by the growth in each of those categories, and then we get our development charge. Next slide, please. So put very simply, what we have is the cost to accommodate the growth, divided by the growth. And on the residential side, we have the development charge per unit. And on the non-residential side, we'll have the development charge per square foot of building area. Next slide, please. So the Development Charges Act lists 19 services that we're allowed to include in a development charge bylaw, but you're only allowed to recover the costs that you are going to incur. And so what we've identified here is the development charge for services related to a highway, which is really roads and public works, fire protection services, libraries, and parks and recreation services. Lastly, we've also included growth-related studies, so the development charge background study itself can be recovered from new development. And other planning studies related to these services. Next slide, please. And next slide. So development charges have been around since the 1950s. They used to be called lot levies under the Planning Act. And then in 1989, a more formalized development charge legislation was prepared. And then in 1997, it was revamped. Over the last few years, there's been a number of changes to the legislation, which I'll talk on the next couple slides. Next slide, please. So a few changes to how we pay development charges. I mentioned typically they're paid at building permit, but if you are rental housing or institutional development, you pay your development charge in installments. So 6 equal installments, first payment upon occupancy, then each year the next 5 years. If you proceed through a site plan application or a zoning bylaw amendment application, your development charge rates will be frozen when you submit your complete application. Once the application is approved by the municipality, then the developer would have 2 years to pull that building permit. If they do so within that 2 years, their rate would still be frozen at the time when they submitted their application. Otherwise, if they take longer, then they pay the rate of the day. Now, that time frame has changed with some other legislative changes, but I'll mention that. With Bill 97, which came into place in 2020, they removed this mandatory deduction we used to have to do. They provided that list of 19 eligible services. And then as well, they brought in a new revenue tool that municipalities can use, called community benefit charges. But that wouldn't apply here. In this case, it only applies to high density developments. There's an exemption for universities and then some additional reporting requirements the treasurer has to do on the reserve fund. Next slide, please. So Bill 23 came into place in 2022, and that's the most common piece of legislation that most people have heard about. It brought in a number of exemptions and deductions and reduced what municipalities could collect through development charges. Now, there's a couple items here that go through that have been highlighted in orange. These items have been reversed with the most recent legislative change. So we have units, affordable housing units that are required through inclusionary zoning bylaws. Those would be exempt. Nonprofit housing, affordable housing, which is, I'll get to the definition in a moment, and then attainable housing, which has not yet been defined. Rental housing gets discounts based on the number of bedrooms. They changed the definition of what a capital cost is to say we're not allowed to include growth-related studies. You notice I already mentioned we did include it. That's because they then changed their minds and put that back in. They did implement this mandatory phase-in where whatever we calculate as part of development charge background study, in the first year we can only impose 80%, and then we can slowly increase that for 5 years. Again, they removed that requirement, so we removed that from our study. There's an interest rate that you can impose on those installment payments. They've set a maximum for that. And then there's a requirement to allocate the monies in your reserve fund. So whatever money you have sitting in the reserve fund for roads, for example, you have to allocate 60% of that to specific projects. And then lastly, they've extended the life of the bylaw to 10 years. Previously, it only was good for 5 years. Next slide, please. And so the affordable housing exemption came into place just recently in June. And so the definition will be defined by a bulletin that the province has put out. And so essentially they put up a dollar value for purchase price or rental price. And if the purchase price or rental price is that or lower, they'd be exempt from development charges. And what it's trying to reflect is that the average income, you would be spending less than 30% of that on housing. And then lastly, Bill 85, which is the most recent change, and I believe that change actually came out when I was, I think the day of, or the day before I was here at the last council meeting. And so what it did was remove the mandatory phase-in, allowed us to include growth-related studies, and then shorten that rate freeze timeline from 2 years to 18 months. The last item there, modernizing public notice requirements. That's another change that came through regulations more recently, and that allows municipalities that don't have a newspaper of record to actually post on your website instead. Their rules still were just up until recently, they had to post your notice requirements in a paper. Next slide, please. And so with the development charges, there's a number of mandatory exemptions that we have to abide by. And so upper tier, lower tier governments and school boards don't charge each other development charges. Industrial buildings can expand their footprint up to 50%, and you don't have to pay a development charge. I mentioned that the universities, there's an exemption for additional residential units. So in a single detached home, semi-detached home, or a townhouse, you can add up to 2 apartments in that house, or 1 in the house, 1 in the garage, for example, and you don't have to pay development charges on those additional apartments. 1 unit or 1% of the units in the existing rental residential building. I mentioned those inclusionary zoning units, nonprofit housing, and the discount for rental units, and then as well those affordable exemptions. Okay, and so most of these are actually recent arising from Bill 23. And then lastly, there's attainable units, but again, that's not yet enforced. There still is no definition on what attainable means. Next slide, please. All right, so council has the ability to provide for additional discretionary exemptions. And so you can reduce the charge in whole or in part for different classes or categories. So for example, all of industrial development or places of worship could be exempt from the charges. I'll note that in addition to phasing in the charge, if you so chose to do that, those exemptions need, and all the exemptions need to be funded from other sources. So I mentioned if the money doesn't come from development charges, it comes from taxes or reserve funds, all the exemptions would have to be funded from other sources. Lastly, we have to recognize redevelopment credits. So if I have a single detached home, knock it down into 3 townhomes, I take the development charge for 3 townhomes minus 1 charge for a single detached home because you already had something there. And just at the bottom here, what we've included is some common discretionary exemptions. You'll notice the draft bylaw doesn't have any discretionary exemptions, but if council so chooses later this evening to include some discretionary exemptions, we can include that in the bylaw. The 2 most common are places of worship and bona fide farms. Otherwise, we've also seen industrial development charges being exempt, hospitals, and some other exemptions. Next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, development charges are in addition to what a developer would normally construct. As part of the background study, Appendix E, we've included a local service policy, just make it easier for the development community, really sets out what the developer's responsibility versus what we would include in development charge calculation. Okay, next slide, please. And so what we're looking at in terms of growth forecast is we're looking at just over 400 new units and just under 367,000 square feet of new building space. Next slide, please. One thing you'll notice as we go through the rate comparison is a little bit of a different methodology in how we calculated the charges this time around. You'll see we've set up categories for residential units, single and semi-detached homes, other multiples of townhomes, larger apartments, smaller apartments, and special care special dwelling units. You'll notice they all have the exact same charge, and that was a different methodology that was used last time. When we do the calculation now, and I'll show you in the next slide, we actually have different charges for the different types of units based on the assumed amount of people in those units, right? So for example, a single detached unit might have on average 3 people, but a small 1-bedroom apartment would have on average be 1.5 people. And so we would expect the charge to be a bit lower for those smaller units. And so I'll show you that in the next slide. And then for non-residential development charges, again, we'll have a different approach to that. So right now it's 20 cents per square foot. Next slide, please. And I'll show you this on a comparison basis on the next couple of slides. But you can see, as I mentioned, you have the charge gets less and less as we move through the different size units, the residential side, and then you see the non-residential charge is $5.87 per square foot. Again, this is due to a different methodology that we use, and this is the methodology our firm uses. We undertake about half of the development charge calculations for municipalities across the province. And so this is a methodology that we've tested at the tribunal and are confident that we can defend this. Next slide, please. And so when we're looking at a comparison of the rates, so you can see for a single detached home, that's the most common type of unit. We're looking at going from $6,736, and it's actually going down a little bit to $6,606 per unit. Next slide, please. And for the non-residential charges I mentioned on a per square foot basis, going from 20 cents per square foot up to $4.87 per square foot. Next slide, please. So how does that compare to your neighboring municipalities? You'll see the dark blue bars are the lower tier charge. The orange bars are the county's charge. And then the green at the bottom is the education development charge, which goes to the school boards. And so you'll see basically you're in the same relative position to your neighbors on the residential side because we're only decreasing the charge a little bit. Next slide, please. And on the non-residential side, you'll see because the charge was so low in the past, it actually puts you up towards the higher end of your neighboring municipalities still within a couple dollars there. Next slide. And with respect to industrial development charges, you'll see that there's no orange bars. That's because the county exempts industrial development charges. Okay, and next slide, please. So after the public meeting, so again, after public meeting delegations, council may have questions, I'll answer them. Once we formally conclude the public meeting, then later tonight, council will consider and pass the bylaw. Please. And that concludes our presentation. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Adams. So at this point in time, we're looking for a comment from the public on the proposed development charges and ensuing bylaw. Madam Clerk, just to be clear, I know that we had gone through the public process of posting it. Have we had any correspondence or anything come through the office formally? I'm sure would be included in the package if there was, or just double check.
No, Madam Mayor, we have not had anyone sign up to present via Zoom or call in or submit written documents.
Okay, wonderful, thank you for that. So looking to the gallery, is there anybody here who is interested in speaking on the development charges proposal? Hearing nothing, I'm sorry, ma'am.
I do have a question. I'm involved with building a non-for-profit seniors residential home in Lakeville. And when do the developmental charges get charged to a non-for-profit organization?
And before you answer that, ma'am, if we could just get your name, your full name for the record, please.
Linda Parsons.
Thank you very much.
So when do development charges get charged to a not-for-profit seniors resident? And so they would be considered the residential side of the charges. They would get at the time of building permit, which is when it would be applied. But working with the treasurer, we can probably provide a more detailed response relative to the legislation if you'd like.
And so if we want to communicate with someone who you're involved with, Mr. Adams, who should we contact?
So you should contact the municipality. So and then they will be able to answer your questions. And if they need assistance from myself, I can also provide assistance based on the legislation. But contacting the municipality.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's all. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions from the gallery? And Madam Clerk, just to confirm again, is there anybody on Zoom who's looking to comment with signed in since we spoke last on this?
No, Madam Mayor, there is no one else. Our treasurer is available if you have questions for him as well.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So over to council, any questions or comments? Councillor Watt. Somebody push a button.
I used it. Oh,
There we go,
push it the
you're
right way, there you go. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, through you. A couple of questions, if I may, please. And I know you had sections in there, like, the roads were so much, and then fire service. Is that how, and maybe this is a question for Paul of the Township, is that how the allocation is done? So let's say the total development charges for a project are $10,000. Is 60% goes to roads and 28% goes to fire? What you have listed out there, that is how that works per department, because they are the ones that take most of our budget for the year?
So, through the mayor, that's correct. That's how the charge is allocated, and it's based on the capital costs that we identified in the background study. So, chapter 5 of the background study sets out all the specific projects that we're recovering the charge for, and so it would be applied to those different services on that basis.
Perfect, thank you. And my next question, one of the things you say, there was about 5 going across there that kind of like exemptions. One of them was place of worship, another one was active farms, that kind of make it. The other one was hospital. So is that specifically as a hospital, or would a health center, like, because they are being more prevalent, popping up all the time, because they kind of come into our lap to look after and provide healthcare for our residents and stuff like that. So would the health center be also under that hospital blanket, or would that be something separate?
So through the mayor, so 2 things. If it's a facility or building that you're providing, then there would be no development charges on it because it's your building or if you're paying for it. If it is a health center, it all depends on how you would like to define it. So typically the most common we see is hospitals generally because they're not automatically exempt under the Development Charges Act. But if there is something that you do want to incentivize, that you do want to provide an exemption for, you can define it as you like.
Thank you.
I think I saw Councillor Johnson's hand up and then Deputy Mayor Nelson, thank you. Okay, Councillor Report, we're all letting it.
A couple slides back, but the second last one you had, you said the increase was residentially, that was 20 cents on the dollar, and now it's $4 or something. Explain that, it change.
Yeah, so through the mayor, the methodology that was used in the previous development charge background study calculation is a different methodology than we would apply. The way that our firm undertakes the development charge calculation, we take those capital costs that we set out in chapter 5, and then we allocate those between residential and non-residential benefit. And so things like roads, for example, we would say, okay, well, how do we allocate the cost of roads between residential and non-residential benefit? Well, we can use the incremental population or employment. And so we take the ratio of population to employment, allocate it in that manner. And so we've done that for each of the different services. For Parks and Recreation services, we would allocate 95% of the cost to residential, 5% to non-residential, because there is some minor component used by non-residential users. And so we take those costs that we've allocated then to the non-residential users and divide it by the non-residential square feet that we're anticipating to calculate the development charge. And so I can't speak to exactly how the methodology was determined in the previous study, but I know that the methodology we use is defensible at the Ontario Land Tribunal because this is something that can be appealed to the tribunal.
There just seems to be an awful change from the current to the calculated one. Does that mean that there is so much more than on the charge to the residential units?
So through there, so this is on the non-residential side that the charge is going up.
Or is it non-residential?
Yeah, on the residential slide, if you could go back one slide, the charge is actually going down from $6,736 per unit down to $6,656 per unit.
Thank you.
I believe we had Deputy Mayor Nelson, followed by Councillor DeVore, thank you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Thanks a lot for your presentation. It's very, very interesting. My question is around the exemptions. Do we have to make that decision before the bylaw is passed on what we want exempt? Or I'll throw up as something happens. Say, for example, there was a new hospital going to happen within our community all of a sudden 2 years down the road that we don't know about. Can council go back and update the bylaw at that time for something that we would like to exempt?
So through the mayor, the intent of the exemptions in the bylaw is that everyone's treated the same. And so you don't want to, on a case-by-case basis, provide really from development charges because you're not supposed to as part of the bylaw process. Now, if you know that you're working on something and potentially there is something in the works for a couple of years from now, and you want to come back and you do want to update the exemptions, you can update the exemptions. You would just have to go through a kind of a mini development charge study process where you would do a quick update study, which really just sets out that nothing's changed, but you do want to update your exemptions. You have a public meeting, let the public and anyone provide comments. And then it's after 60 days after you release the report, then you can pass the bylaw amendment, which would update the exemptions.
Just a follow-up to that. So in other words, we're better off to include our exemptions now up front. Anything that we might see that would be within this next 10 years that we would want to include them exemptions with. And that way then there would be not have to be any update. Is that correct?
Yeah, so yes, you should, if you have an idea of those types of exemptions that you want to provide, then you should do so now. Understanding that any exemption you provide needs to be funded. So if they, let's say, for example, it was a hospital and they were going to be 100,000 square feet, so they were going to be paying $487,000. You would need to fund that from taxes into the reserve fund to keep it whole, because they should have paid that in development.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Councilor Report.
Thank you, Mayor Watson, through you. Thank you very much for the presentation here. I have a quick question, perhaps goes to our treasurer as well. I know that the development charge is based on projected growth of 409 homes in the community. In the event that with provincial policies and regulations coming into effect here, if we see a huge upswing in residential home development, let's say from 400 up to 800, how would that impact the development charges, and do those get modified every couple of years, or is there kind of a review process?
So through the mayor, so there's not a mandatory review process. The development charge bylaw would be good for 10 years. But if you do see some significant changes in your growth, you'll probably have some changes in your capital needs and what you need to fund. And so what you'd want to do is you'd want to just take a look at it. The treasurer would probably do some quick math and say, is it more advantageous for us to come back and update the study? And then you guys can update the study and have an updated charge, or if you just do the math and it's pretty close to what you need, or there's not significant changes in your capital needs, then it may be more advantageous to just leave it. So it's mostly the treasurer will kind of do a quick analysis to see, oh, things have changed. Do we need to update? Let me just do some quick math, and then you guys make that decision.
Thank you.
If I can just add on to that, since it is half directed to me anyways, sorry, Mayor. Through you, Mayor, and to Councillor Vervoort, just to add on to that, I would think a doubling of our residential growth would result in revisiting the study as it sits. That's pretty significant. If it's an extra 100 units, that's probably not going to result in dramatically changing our capital forecast. But I think anything that dramatically changes our capital forecast as it relates to growth would result in updating the study.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from council? Mr. Rouse, before I let you off the hook, I have a question. I think it was slide 9, we were talking about the eligible expenses or costs that could be bundled into DCs. I'm just looking for some clarification because I may have misheard you. You had fire emergency services, but not policing. I'm assuming because policing for us is OpEx and not cap, and that's why that's not being bundled in? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Development charges are only to recover the capital costs. We're not allowed to include operating costs.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for that confirmation, clarification. Hearing nothing else from council, simply we are looking to close the public meeting at this point in time. Everyone else, seconded by Councillor Vervoort, all in favor. That motion carries. And then also a motion to receive the presentation and all comments. Councillor Watt, seconded by Councillor Johnston, all in favor. That motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. App. And we'll deal with the bylaw at the end of the meeting. Sound good? Oh, okay, we need to deal with it now, I'm being asked. People want to get on with their evening, and I understand. Okay, so it is item 13.2. Thank you very much. So before you is the bylaw to approve the new DC bylaw. Councillor Vervoort, is that a motion to approve that? Seconded by Councillor Watt. Any discussion? All in favor? And that motion carries. Anything else? I'm at your service. No, we're good. All right, thank you so much. Moving on, then, as noted earlier, we don't have a presentation on item 8.2. So on to section 9, which is the public comment period. And although the deadline was extended to accommodate the long weekend, we didn't have anybody register for the public comment period. So moving on to staff reports, 10.1, our report and capital project status. Council, do you have any questions of staff on that report? Then just a motion, Councillor Watt, second by Councillor Johnston.
And we can straighten development charges.
And we can strike that off as completed, that's getting things done. All in favor? And that motion is carried. Staff report, item 10.2, Peterborough County OPP Detachment Board Terms of Reference. Madam Clerk, you're going to speak on that?
Thank you. So the report that is before you is regarding the new OPP or the new police service board. For us, we use OPP as our service provider, so it directly relates to them. Because of the changes to the Police Service Board Act, our detachment board will now encompass many of our neighboring townships and the First Two Nations. And our board will have 15 members as opposed to the 3 that our board used to have when it was just our township. Because of that large change, we have worked as a group to form a new terms of reference that now matches the new legislation. It's gone through a few rounds of revision. Some of the other partners on the board have already passed it. And so it's before you now for review and comments and approval if you so wish.
Council, questions? Councillor Watt?
I just want to know, you're a representative, and you've probably been in the rounds talk, so I got everything's good as far as our township is concerned. Like, there's probably little tweaks in there that maybe, because like, let's take Selwyn, for instance, it has 2 different police services that look after part. So are we tweaked in there that you're satisfied with?
Yeah, certainly. The terms of reference, interestingly, the board hasn't been able to sit as a board yet, partially because we don't have a terms of reference. And usually the board is the one that's kind of creating that terms of reference, but also because of insurance, believe it or not. And I believe that this has just been solved. I saw a notice on this in the last couple of days. But, you know, as many nonprofit boards require directors and officers insurance effectively, there's been, because this is a new thing, that's coming into effect for all police services boards across the province. Normally our police services board was covered under township insurance because we were a township run board and committee, but now it's a third party. So there's been no insurance product on the market, as I understand, to actually cover police services boards. So they've had to back up a little bit, work with some insurers to create that product or find a product, and now there is. So now the board can finally sit down and meet. So all that to say is the terms and conditions that's before us this evening are generic enough that will allow the board to meet and try and figure out, you know, now how do we go forward? And I imagine that they will be, you know, once that board gets together and is moving forward with a bit more finite of a mandate as a board, and they're able to sit, then they'll be looking at probably making some changes down the road if I had to guess. But I'm satisfied with the way that it is, and then as the clerk had mentioned, a number of other councils who have already had meetings in advance prior to this have gone through and approved it.
All right, that's fine, thank you. And just to throw it there again, because I know your schedule is pretty crazy sometimes, like personal and professional, so if there's any time that you think that it's something to pass on, I would be willing to step back in it because I did it previously in a previous term of council. So
Awesome.
I'll just throw that out there that I'm available if necessary.
Of course, thank you very much, Councillor. So was that a motion then? Do we have a
Yeah.
motion on this? Thank you. Deputy Mayor Nelson will second that motion. Any other questions or comments on the motion? All in favor? That motion is approved. Thank you. On to item 10.3, request to stop up, close, and sell part of the 6th Line Road North Road Allowance. Madam Clerk, over to you again.
Madam Mayor, just before we move on to that point, Councillor Watt just brought up his willingness to act as an alternate at the board. Council could pass a motion today to appoint him as an alternate. It's already in the terms of reference, so then when the board is formed, we already have an alternate. We want to come back and have a new discussion, if you so wish.
That's a great idea. Thank you very much.
If everyone else, so I'll leave it to the council.
Councilor report.
Through you, Mayor Watson, I would like to make a motion to have Councillor Watt step in as the alternate here.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Nelson.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? That motion carries. Look at you, volunteering for things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just like county is great.
That's right. Okay, now on to item 10.3, and I will hand that over to our clerk, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the report that's before you is regarding a recent request we've received from Mr. Little and his wife. They are inquiring about purchasing a portion of the unopened road allowance of the 6th line north. So we've already spoken about part of this road allowance with another applicant who has come through, Mr. Avery. Mr. Little and Mrs. Little are looking to purchase land outside of the request that Mr. Avery had made. So in the report, I've gone through kind of some of the background, the policy we have in place. And also, we have a letter from Mr. Pride, who is the Little's attorney, outlining their request. And they had offered two options, option 1, which does not comply with our policy, and option 2, which does comply with our policy. And speaking with Mr. Pride on behalf of the Littles, they are satisfied to move forward with option 2, which does mirror policy and does not create any conflict. So the report is before you to make a decision whether you would like council to begin processing this request under our policy and to start a public consultation.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Questions, comments, Councillor
I
Johnson?
have a question now. At one of the meetings, they were going to be doing surveys to see who owned what as far as right up to the water, because the issue was getting a vote in by Mr. Little, and he said at that time that the docks would be in his way. Does this here, will it spell out that the docks will have to be removed?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is part of their request. There is a survey done. The other party who has made a previous request, Mr. Avery, he's doing his own survey, as is required under the policy. So all the land will be surveyed in total. And we've already spoken to Mr. Avery about some of the property standards issues on his property that need to be cleaned up once he finishes his process as well.
So to answer my question, then the docks would have to be removed. Is that right?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there will be docks that need to be moved around. They may need to be removed in total, but that is a bylaw, a building bylaw issue to be dealt with. And so I can't personally comment on where the docks will end up, but if Mr. Little purchases the land as per his survey, of course, we cannot have a dock on someone else's land, so it will have to be moved.
Okay.
Other questions? I see other hands go up on this, and then Councillor Watt.
I will make a motion then to start the proceedings to have Mr. Little attain this property and all the requests and accommodations go with it,
As for option 2.
as per option 2.
Deputy Mayor Nelson, seconding that.
I'll second the motion.
Councillor Ward, we were
I was just about to
just rightly seconded. Okay, any questions or comments on the motion? All in favor? That motion is carried. On to item 10.4, Enbridge franchise renewal agreement, and that is on the CIO's desk. Mr. Nutter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Watson. The attached agreement actually permits Enbridge to construct and maintain their distribution system on our property, our road allowances in this case. They serve approximately 380 customers in Douro-Dummer right now. The predecessor agreement actually has been in place since February 2005, and typically they are 20-year agreements. That's what they're proposing again this time. But we've had some form of agreement with them in place since 1959. We're starting this now, which seems very early since it's not expiring until February, but it is a fairly lengthy process. So we'll be asking council tonight to approve the form of draft bylaw and authorize the submission to the Ontario Energy Board. And then later in the meeting, we'll ask you to consider a draft bylaw and give it first and second reading. Enbridge will then be notified of that, and they will make an application to the Ontario Energy Board for approval of the franchise agreement.
And then once we receive that order, it will come back here and council will be asked to give it a third reading and pass the bylaw.
Thank you. Look forward to that. Council, any questions? Deputy Mayor Johnson.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. Just one question on that, Mike. And, is there any other things in this, agreement? I'm just gonna go back a little bit in history with Enbridge. I had an issue actually with Enbridge, back a number of years ago when we were doing some digging and Enbridge came in and give us exuberant costs for, we hit a gas line and we were actually in the right and we were proven to be in the right by TSSA. And, but they still wanted to, charge us an exuberant amount of money to fix that gas line. And, anyways, we done everything right. And once we had a little talk with them, that they were actually in our road allowance and not meaning anything by this, but if it had been our fault, we're not doing what we should have been, absolutely. But anyways, it took us a threat to Enbridge in order for them to back off on this exuberant cost that they were going to charge us. And that's still kind of stuck in my crop, I guess, about how much they actually wanted to take out of, and they're in township, it's in township property. And we told them that we could actually charge them for being in township property. That's what changed. So I just throw that out there as a cautionary. I know sometimes I just don't want any agreement that's going to say, well, guess what, Mr. Township, you're on the hook for something that maybe we're not on the hook for. And so I just throw that out there from that personal experience that we had back at that time.
Mr. Ryan, comment?
Any?
Sure. Through you, Mayor Watson, there are provisions in the agreement that talk about damage, if there is damage to properties and who pays, and if we require it to be moved for whatever purpose because of development, there's a cost sharing formula in that 65-35. So there are provisions that will protect us and them in those cases. One of the things we've requested that I'm told as I was discussing this with the department heads, we've never really had a good as-built set of drawings, and so we've requested a complete as-built set of drawings, which should help us avoid those kind of situations where we're digging up something we just don't know who they are. Right. We still have to get locates.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think there are some protections in there, but there are cost sharing mechanisms built in.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for that.
Any other questions from council? So we're just looking for a motion at this point in time. Councilor Johnson? To move forward with the agreement. Councilor Report, your name is up to second that. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? That motion carries. Just so excited. Okay, on to minutes, I believe, committee minutes and other reports. We've got the Public Library Board meeting minutes from May 14th rather, and payable from June 25th. One motion to receive and approve would probably suffice. Unless there's any questions, Councilor Report. You're making a motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Seconded by Councilor Watt. Councilor Johnston, your hand is up. Are you have questions or you're good?
I'm in favor.
All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. Okay, item number 12, we have a number of items for correspondence. We'll go through each one because I think they'll require some sort of action. So 12.1, Nancy and Michelle. Any missing it? Road maintenance and gravel request for Forbes Lane. What would you like to do with that, Council? Councilor Johnston.
Yeah, too bad the roads department weren't here because it says in here that they do this on a regular basis, and I would just want to verify that. And if that's the case, then I would proceed and give them.
Sure, Councilor Johnson. I think Martina has, Madam Clerk, on behalf of Public Works, has a bit of information that she can share.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We did speak to Jay Condon, our manager of public works, about this request. In the past, there was a council resolution to provide limited snow maintenance to this road, but that resolution has long since expired. But in speaking to Mr. Condon, he is happy to offer up to 5 loads of gravel and 2 culvert pipes to respond to this request. But he would prefer that any other further requests come back on a yearly basis, so it can be considered each year, as opposed to trying to put a resolution in place that covers multiple years, so that we can deal with the problems as they arise.
So through the chair, I just want to, we're strictly providing the material, not installing, is that right?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that would be correct.
Yeah.
Any other questions from council on this matter? Councilor Watt?
Sorry, Madam Mayor. So we're not installing the culverts, we're just gonna provide. Okay, I wasn't quite clear on that one, so, all right, thank you.
Councilor Ward?
Through you, Mayor Watson, I think we're pretty clear on the specifics of this one now, so I would like to make a motion to receive the report or receive this correspondence item and then proceed with providing the gravel and culverts as directed by Public Works Director Jake Condon.
Okay, and that'd be a yearly request, that
Correct.
any further requests come
Definitely a
forward to
yearly
council on
request,
an annual
yes.
basis?
Yes.
Okay. Deputy Mayor
I'll
Nelson,
second that.
seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. Item 12.2, we have a letter regarding building department discussions from the Howard. What would you like to do with that, Deputy Mayor Nelson?
I'll move to receive it.
And will someone second that motion? Councilor Vermort, any discussion? All in favor? That motion carries. 12.3, correspondence from Richard Taylor regarding Mary Young's presentation to council on June 18th. Councilor Vermort,
Through Mayor Watson, motion to receive.
anyone to second that? Councilor Watt?
Second question.
Okay.
Sorry, keep getting this. Is this something, because Mary did a presentation to us, is this something that she should get a copy of as a, or is this something that's just for the township's own specific, usage?
Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is now a public document as it's on the agenda, so Mary or anyone else can access this letter at their leisure.
Thank you. Then if I could through you, Madam Mayor, because Mary came to the delegation, I would like to receive the letter, or it's already been received, but I would also like to actually send her a copy of it because she did an actual presentation and anyone else that wants it can just access it through the normal channels.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor. So would this be a friendly amendment to the motion since the Councilor White, you seconded that motion, Councilor Vermort?
Yes, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. So the motion is to receive and forward a copy of the letter correspondence to Ms. Young. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? That motion carries. 12.4, Baker Tilly 2022 consolidated financial statement for the township. Councilor Report.
I'd like to make a motion to receive.
Thank you. Seconded. Deputy Mayor Nelson. Any discussion? All in favor? That motion carries. 12.5, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO request for support for AMO on a joint resolution campaign on physician shortage. Deputy Mayor Nelson.
I'll move to receive and support.
You want to second that? Councilor Johnston. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? That motion carries. 12.6, Children's Aid Society's Office to Local 334 regarding funding request to the province. What would you like to do with that, Council?
I'll make a motion to receive and support.
Okay, will someone second that motion? Councilor Watt, any discussion on the motion? All in favor? That motion carries. On to 12.7, Township of Autonomy South Monaghan, regulations for the importation and safe use of lithium ion batteries. Councilor Watt.
I'll make a motion to receive and support, and, maybe we can work with them and put something on our website for knowledge. I mean, this is something that I didn't know either, but this is, it looks like it's pretty dangerous stuff, so if we can get some education in regards to on our website to correspond with us, I would be happy. That would be part of my motion, please.
Okay, I think, before, I think the clerk has some knowledge on that, just in talking to our fire chief, but does somebody want to second that, just for discussion purposes? Thank you, Councilor Johnston. Madam Clerk, do you just want to talk a little bit about your conversations with our fire chief on that, please?
So, through you, Madam Mayor, when this letter came in from Tommy South Flanagan, I did forward it to our fire chief so he could review it, as this was a matter I didn't have any knowledge or background on. Our fire chief is in support of the request that's being made by Tommy South Flanagan, and there are discussions at the local fire chief association meetings about these types of batteries and the additional training our firefighters need to address these the safety concerns. So.
So we've got a second, we can call the vote on this. Any more discussion on this? All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. On to item 12.8, the Township of, it's doing so good. Belcher Valley? Yeah, same week. Resolution to support increase to infrastructure funding.
Through Mayor Watson, a motion to receive and support.
Seconded. Councilor Johnston, any discussion? All in favor? And that motion also carries. Look at us go. On to item number 13, bylaws. Of course, we've already dealt with 13.2. So 13.1 is enter into agreement with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario for the CCP Canada Community Building Fund, which was also previously called the Gas Tax Fund. It's under a new name. Clerk can chat about that if so, but Councilor Watt.
Approve that bylaw.
Okay, seconded. Deputy Mayor Nelson, any discussion? All in favor? That motion carries. And then the, as our CAO was referencing 13.3, the bylaw for the franchise agreement between Township and Enbridge Gas. I don't know how this first and second reading business works. Do we get to pass two motions, or are we just emphatically are passing one motion? How does this work?
Through you, Madam Mayor, you can have one motion which says that council is reading the bylaw the first and second time, with the move on a second. And then when we're ready to have the third reading, we'll bring it for the back reading.
Okay, so one motion for two readings, go. Deputy Mayor Nelson, seconded by Councilor Johnston. Any discussion? All in favor? And that carries twice. We have no reports, no notices, or are there any notices of motion, I should say? Nothing's been submitted, but nothing. Any announcements from council? Councilor Johnson has this vote, so that means there's a date coming up.
That's right. We will be having our Douro doings in Douro at the village and at the park, the Douro Park. We're going to be having a little celebration of our park, meaning this year is 50 years old, that they bought the park property. And we want to have a little celebration thanking the council of the day for doing the job they did here, because today, by a park like that, we wouldn't be able to afford it. So I'm ready, we're going to have a meeting and set up that we're going to put a plaque possibly at both parks across Indian River on both sides, and also have the families of the people that have passed away to represent them of the council today, and that will be on Sunday, September 1st, that Labor Day weekend. It'll be at the Douro Park, so we'll be letting you know more, but it's probably neighborhood 12 or 12, and just a little cutting ribbon of designated back for the last 50 years.
Wonderful, thank you, and thank you for your work on that, Councillor. I know when we received that presentation some time ago, there was some questions yet to be answered and trying to work through it all, so I'm excited for that. Councillor Watt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. More of an announcement or more of
thank you. Good turnout for Ladies Market for 50th anniversary. Great speeches, and thank you, Mayor Watson, for representing our township so well. We also had our MP or MPP and Bonnie Clark also for our county warden, and the mayor of Selwyn also got up and said a few words. So the guy was very, very well attended and much appreciated because it is a jewel in our township. So thank you very much for looking after us.
Thank you, Councillor Wyatt. It was a celebration indeed. Any other announcements from council? Moving on then, we will be going into closed session, so folks in the gallery, we'll be asking you to vacate momentarily. We're going into closed for reasons, personnel matters and also land. So we'll be just looking for a motion to go into closed. Councillor Verboer, and that's seconded by Deputy Mayor Nelson. All in favor? That motion carries. So folks just stand by while we get the room transition for our closed session.